The steam rising from the porcelain cup was the only thing moving in Minjun's immediate vicinity, a delicate, ghostly spiral that vanished before it could reach the height of his chin. The tea room of the Grand Obsidian Hotel was a cavern of polished marble, velvet drapes, and the low, murmuring hum of people who had never worried about the price of anything in their lives. It was a Sunday, which meant the air was thick with the clinking of silver spoons and the performative laughter of families trying to convince themselves they were happy. Minjun sat alone at a table meant for four. He always sat at a table meant for four. It was a habit born of a superstition he refused to articulate, a quiet, stubborn defiance against the reality of his life. He was 42, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than the average car, and he possessed the kind of stillness that made waiters nervous. To the staff, he was the chairman, a man whose business interests were vast, vaguely defined, and terrifyingly efficient. To the rest of the room, he was a cold, impenetrable statue. He checked his watch, a piece of mechanical perfection that told him he had been sitting here for exactly 19 minutes. He was waiting for nothing. He was simply existing, enduring the anniversary of a day he wished he could scrub from the calendar. The emptiness of the chair opposite him felt like a physical weight, a gravitational pull that threatened to drag his posture down, but his spine remained steel straight. He lifted the cup, the Darjeeling fragrant and bitter, and that was when the periphery of his vision was invaded by a sudden, coordinated movement of pastel color. Two figures appeared at the edge of his table, moving with the silent, predatory grace of seasoned cat burglars, though they couldn't have been more than 10 years old. They were identical twins, young African-American girls with hair styled in matching puffs, both wearing identical light pink dresses with stiff, ruffled skirts that rustled softly as they halted. They stared at him with wide, intelligent eyes that seemed to be assessing his structural integrity. Minjun paused, the teacup hovering halfway to his mouth. He was accustomed to people approaching him with fear, with greed, or with trembling petitions for mercy regarding a debt. He was not accustomed to children. He slowly lowered the cup to the saucer with a soft clink. The girl on the left placed her hands flat on the pristine white tablecloth, leaning inconspiratorially. The girl on the right mirrored the action perfectly, their movements synchronized as if they shared a single operating system. They looked around the room, scanning for threats, before the one on the left locked eyes with him. "Pretend you're our father," she whispered, the command urgent and breathless. Minjun blinked, his carefully constructed mask of indifference cracking just a fraction. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep and raspy from disuse. "Just for 20 minutes, the second twin hissed, checking over her shoulder. "We need a dad.
Right now.
The lady in the hat is coming back, and if she sees us alone again, she's going to call security." Minjun looked past them. A severe-looking woman with a clipboard and a hat that resembled a bird's nest was indeed scanning the room, looking officious and annoyed. He looked back at the girls. "I am not the most convincing candidate," Minjun said dryly, gesturing vaguely to his sharp, terrifying features and the fact that he was Korean. The first twin rolled her eyes, a gesture of supreme impatience. "We're adopted in this scenario. Work with us. Please." There was something in the please that caught him. It wasn't a beg. It was a negotiation. It was a sound he recognized, the sound of someone backed into a corner, but refusing to surrender. Minjun felt a strange, unfamiliar spark in his chest, a tiny interruption to the grayness that had consumed his week. He looked at the empty chairs. He looked at the girls, who were vibrating with anxiety, but holding their ground. 20 minutes, Minjun said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rumble. "Sit." The twins scrambled into the chairs opposite him just as the woman with the bird nest hat rounded the pillar. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted them, marching over with the gait of someone who enjoyed enforcing rules. "There you are," the woman said, her voice shrill. "I told you too, this tea service is for families. Unaccompanied children are not." She stopped abruptly as Minjun slowly turned his head. He didn't scowl. He simply directed the full weight of his attention toward her. It was a look that had silenced boardrooms and ended gang wars without a single punch being thrown. "Is there a problem?" Minjun asked, his tone silky and dangerous. The woman faltered, her clipboard lowering. I wasn't aware they were with the Guardian, sir. They were running through the lobby. Minjun turned to the girls. Chloe, Zoe, he said, inventing names on the fly, hoping he wouldn't regret it. Were you running? The twins shook their heads in perfect unison, eyes wide and innocent. We were just looking for you, Papa, the one on the right said, her voice dripping with sugary sweetness. We got lost, Minjun turned back to the woman. They were looking for me. And now they are found. You may go. The dismissal was absolute. The woman flushed, murmured an apology, and retreated hastily. As soon as she was out of earshot, the twins exhaled simultaneously, slumping into their chairs. Nice, the left twin said, nodding with respect. You're scary. I like it. I'm Chloe, by the way.
She's Zoe.
You're good at guessing. Minjun felt the corner of his mouth twitch.
Y ella Minjun.
And I am not scary. I am merely distinct. The relief at the table was palpable, but it was short-lived. The sound of high heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor heralded a new arrival. Minjun shifted his gaze to see a woman in a green coat and a beige dress hurrying toward them, her expression a chaotic mix of panic and exhaustion. She was beautiful, with a warmth to her features that even her evident stress couldn't mask, but she looked like she was holding herself together with sheer will. This, he assumed, was the mother. She spotted the girls and her shoulders dropped 3 inches, the tension leaving her body in a rush, only to be replaced by confusion when she saw Minjun. She slowed down, approaching the table with caution, her eyes darting from her daughters to the impeccably dressed stranger sipping tea. Girls, she said, her voice breathless. I told you to wait in the lobby while I parked the car. You scare me half to death. Chloe and Zoe straightened up, looking significantly more guilty than they had with the hotel staff. We're sorry, Mom, Zoe said. But the lady with the hat was going to kick us out because we weren't a complete party, so we found a dad. The mother, Elena, stopped at the edge of the table, her hands gripping her purse strapped tightly. She looked at Minjun, her eyes wide with apology. Oh my God. I am so sorry, she said, her voice rushing. I hope they haven't been bothering you.
They have.
Active imaginations. Girls, get up. We're leaving this poor man alone. Minjun set his cup down. He looked at Elena, taking in the frayed hem of her coat and the way her hands were shaking slightly. He looked at the empty chair beside him. He looked at the girls, who were looking at him with a silent, desperate plea. He didn't want to go back to being the man alone at the table for 4. He didn't want the silence to return. They are not bothering me, Minjun said, standing up. He buttoned his suit jacket with a fluid motion. In fact, I believe we were just about to order cake.
Please.
Join us. Elena hesitated, flushed with embarrassment. Sir, I can't impose. This is a very expensive place, and you look like you're waiting for someone. Minjun shook his head gently. I am waiting for no one, he said, the truth of it landing heavier than he intended. And it is already paid for. It would be a shame to waste the reservation. The staff here, he lowered his voice, leaning in slightly, are very particular about empty chairs. You would be doing me a favor. It was a lie, but it was a kind one. Elena searched his face, looking for a trap, but found only a strange, quiet sadness masked by politeness. The twins kicked her gently under the table. Please, Mom, Chloe whispered. He's really cool. He scared the hat lady away. Elena let out a long breath, a small, weary smile finally breaking through. Okay, she said. Just for a little bit. I'm Elena. Minjun pulled out the chair for her, a gesture of old-world chivalry that seemed to catch her off guard.
Minjun, Hoy replied.
As she sat, the scent of rain and vanilla perfume drifted from her coat, a stark contrast to the sterile, expensive smell of the hotel air. For the first time in 3 years, the table was full. The waiter approached, looking terrified and confused to see the Korean tycoon suddenly surrounded by a bright, chaotic family unit. Sir, the waiter squeaked. More cups, Minjun commanded, his voice firm. And cake. Whatever the young ladies want. And perhaps, he glanced at Elena. Chamomile? You look like you've had a long morning. Elena looked at him, surprised. How did you know? I have people who work for me, Minjun said simply. I know the look of someone managing a crisis. The arrival of the cake, a three-tiered stand filled with pastries that cost more than a weekly grocery run, changed the atmosphere entirely. The twins, Chloe and Zoe, abandoned their cat burglar personas and became delighted 10-year-olds, dissecting the macarons with surgical precision and arguing over who got the chocolate eclair. Minjun found himself watching them with a fascination he couldn't quite explain. He was used to silence. He was used to order. This was messy. Crumbs were falling on the tablecloth. Zoe was explaining a complex theory about how the hotel was actually a spaceship. Chloe was correcting her on the physics of propulsion. It was noise, but it wasn't the irritating noise of the general public. It was the specific, vibrant noise of life happening right in front of him. Elena, having taken a few sips of the tea, seemed to relax, her shoulders unknotted. She watched him watching the girls. You're good with them, she noted quietly, breaking his trance. Most men would have called security themselves. Minjun turned his gaze to her. I have a high tolerance for bold strategies, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. They identified a target, assessed the risk, and executed a plan. I respect the efficiency, Elena laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made the waiter pause nearby. Don't encourage them. They're already too smart for their own good. Their father, she trailed off, the smile faltering. She picked up her spoon, stirring her tea unnecessarily. Their father wasn't much for strategy. He was more of a leave when things get hard kind of man. The confession hung in the air, a small offering of vulnerability. Minjun understood the currency of pain. He dealt in it daily. Strategy is learned through necessity, Minjun said softly. It seems you have taught them how to survive. Elena looked up, meeting his eyes. I try. It's just
hard
to be the bad cop and the good cop and the provider and the protector all at once. Today was supposed to be a treat. We saved up for 2 months to come here for the princess tea. Then I couldn't find parking, and we were late, and I thought I ruined it. She looked at the girls, who were now trying to balance spoons on their noses. Thank you for saving it. Minjun felt a tightness in his throat. He reached out, adjusting the cuff of his shirt, a nervous tick he hadn't displayed in years. My wife, he started, the words feeling rusty, like a gate that hadn't been opened in a decade. She loved this place. The lemon tart specifically. We used to come here every year on this day. Elena stopped stirring. She looked at him with a sudden, piercing clarity. Is that why you were alone? Minjun nodded once, a sharp, concise movement. She passed away 3 years ago. I come here to remember. But usually, remembering just feels like sitting in a cold room waiting for a ghost. He looked at the girls again. Chloe had successfully balanced the spoon. Zoe was clapping. Today, however, Minjun added, his voice softer, it is remarkably loud. And I find that I do not mind the noise. 3 years, Elena whispered, a sympathetic echo. She didn't offer a platitude. She didn't say it gets better, or she's in a better place. She just acknowledged the time. That's a long time to have tea by yourself. It felt longer, Minjun admitted. Until about 20 minutes ago, a sudden chime from the piano in the corner of the room interrupted them. The pianist, a man in a tuxedo who looked bored out of his mind, shifted from background jazz to a lively, bouncing waltz. Several fathers in the room stood up, taking their daughters' hands to guide them to the small parquet dance floor in the center. It was the father-daughter waltz, a tradition of the hotel's Sunday service. Chloe and Zoe stopped their spoon antics. They looked at the dance floor. They looked at each other. Then, with that same terrifying synchronization, they looked at Minjun. Papa, Zoe said, emphasizing the role-play title with a mischievous grin. It's time to dance, Minjun stiffened. Absolutely not, he said immediately. I do not dance. I preside. I observe. I do not spin. Chloe was already out of her chair. She rounded the table and grabbed his left hand. You're wearing a 3-piece suit, she argued. You're legally required to know how to waltz. Come on. Mom can't dance with both of us, Elena laughed, hiding her face behind her teacup. She's got you there, Minjun. The suit does imply a certain level of ballroom proficiency. Minjun looked at the small hand gripping his large, scarred hand. He looked at the room, full of people who would undoubtedly stare. He thought about his reputation. He thought about the men who feared him, who would be baffled to see the chairman being dragged onto a dance floor by a 10-year-old in pink ruffles. Then he looked at Chloe's face. She wasn't afraid of him. She just wanted to dance. She wanted the memory. And strangely, he found that he wanted to give it to her. He stood up, the chair scraping softly against the marble. "Very well," he sighed, feigning reluctance. "But if you step on my shoes, I will deduct it from your inheritance," Chloe beamed. "Deal." He led her to the floor. He expected to feel awkward, exposed. But as he took her small hand and placed his other hand gently on her shoulder, the muscle memory took over. He had danced with his wife here. The rhythm was in his bones. He swept Chloe into a turn, his movements precise and graceful. The girl giggled, her dress flaring out. For a moment, the grief that usually choked him in this room was replaced by the simple mechanics of the waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. He spun her, dipped her dramatically, and then, as the song shifted, Zoe cut in with the smoothness of a tag team wrestler, taking her sister's place without him missing a beat.
He laughed.
He actually laughed, a deep, rusty sound that surprised him. He looked over Zoe's head to the table, where Elena was watching them. She had lowered her cup, and her expression was soft, unguarded, and undeniably hopeful. Minjun spun Zoe around, the world blurring into streaks of gold and pink, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't want the song to end. He didn't want to go back to the table alone. He realized, with a sudden jolt of panic and clarity, that the 20 minutes were up, and he was terrified of what would happen when the clock ran out. The transition from the golden warmth of the tea room to the gray, fluorescent hum of the parking garage felt like waking up from a particularly vivid dream. Minjun walked Elena and the girls to their car, his polished Oxfords making sharp, rhythmic clicks on the concrete, while the twins skipped ahead, still high on sugar and the thrill of their successful heist. Elena walked beside him, clutching her purse, the magic of the waltz fading into the reality of a Sunday evening. Her car was a sensible, older sedan, the kind that had seen better days and carried the battle scars of grocery store parking lots. It sat in stark contrast to the sleek, black Phantom that waited 2 rows over, attended by a driver who was currently pretending not to watch his boss escort a family to a 10-year-old hatchback. Elena stopped at the driver's door, fumbling for her keys. "You really didn't have to walk us down," she said, looking up at him. The fluorescent light washed out the color in her cheeks, making her look tired again, the single mother re-emerging from the Cinderella interlude. "I know this was a lot."
"Thank you."
"Really? You made their year." Minjun stood with his hands clasped behind his back, a posture of habitual restraint. He looked at the girls, who were now buckled in the back seat, waving frantically through the glass. He looked at Elena. He wanted to say something profound, something that would bridge the gap between his world of silent, expensive rooms and her world of chaotic, vibrant struggle. Instead, he reached into his breast pocket and produced a card. It was heavy stock, matte black with gold lettering, containing nothing but a name and a private number. "For the next time you require a strategist," he said, handing it to her. Elena took it, her fingers brushing his. Her skin was rougher than his, callous from work, warm and alive. "I don't think we'll be sneaking into high tea again anytime soon," she said with a soft laugh, though her eyes lingered on the card. "Strategies are not limited to tea," Minjun replied. "Sometimes they are required for tire changes, or homework disputes, or simply because the silence is too loud." He held her gaze for a beat longer than was socially polite, letting the subtext hang in the air. "Drive safely, Elena." As he watched her tail lights fade around the spiral exit ramp, the silence of his own life rushed back in, but this time, it felt less like a fortress and more like a cage. Later that night, sitting in his penthouse overlooking the city grid, Minjun stared at his phone. The screen glowed in the dark room. He typed, deleted, and retyped. Finally, he sent a message to the number she had scribbled on a napkin for him. The 20 minutes were insufficient. I find myself wondering if the team requires a permanent consultant. 3 weeks later, the consultant found himself in a setting that tested his composure far more than any boardroom negotiation: the city aquarium on a Saturday. The humidity was at tropical levels, the noise was deafening, and Minjun was wearing a cashmere sweater that was rapidly becoming a regret. He had not expected the sheer volume of children. He had not expected the smell of popcorn and chlorine. But then he saw them waiting by the jellyfish tank, the twins in matching denim overalls, and Elena in a simple yellow sundress that seemed to capture all the available light in the dim room. When Zoe spotted him, she didn't wave. She simply pointed, as if identifying a target for acquisition. "Minhyun?" Chloe shouted, ignoring the quiet please signs. Minjun felt every head in the vicinity turn toward him. He didn't care. He walked toward them, the crowd parting instinctively around his imposing figure, until he reached the glow of the tank. "Report," he said solemnly to the girls. Zoe grinned, pointing at a drifting, translucent blob. "We have identified the jellyfish. They have no brains. Chloe says they remind her of boys at school." The afternoon unfolded in a series of small, terrifying, and wonderful beats. Minjun, a man who curated art collections, found himself holding a half-eaten pretzel while Elena tied Zoe's shoe. He found himself explaining the logistics of shipping lanes to Chloe while staring at a shark tank, treating her questions with the same gravity he would give a business partner. "So, if the shark wanted to leave," Chloe asked, pressing her hand against the glass, "would he need a plan?" Minjun looked at the shark, swimming its endless, repetitive circle. "Everyone needs a plan to leave, Chloe. Sometimes the tank is comfortable. Sometimes the shark doesn't know he is trapped until someone shows him the ocean." He felt Elena's eyes on him. She was standing close enough that he could smell the vanilla scent again. "Are you talking about the shark, Minjun?" she asked quietly. He turned to her. The blue light from the tank cast moving shadows across her face. "I am talking about the difficulty of changing one's nature," he admitted. And the unexpected motivation to try. Elena reached out, her hand hovering near his elbow before settling there, a light, grounding touch. "Maybe the shark just needs a reason to stop swimming in circles," she whispered. Minjun looked down at her and then at the girls, who were arguing over which fish was the boss of the tank. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the shark. He felt like the diver, standing on the edge of the water, preparing to jump. 6 months passed, and the rhythm of Minjun's life began to fracture in ways that terrified his staff and delighted the twins. The breakdown of his solitude was not an explosion, but a slow, steady erosion. It was Tuesday nights at Elena's cramped apartment, where he learned that he was terrible at Mario Kart but excellent at helping with Common Core math. It was the way his driver began keeping a stash of juice boxes in the glove compartment of the Rolls-Royce. But the true turning point came on a rainy November evening. Minjun was in his office, in the middle of a high-stakes acquisition meeting, when his personal phone buzzed. It was a specific ringtone he had assigned only recently. He held up a hand, silencing a room of lawyers. "Speak," he answered. It was Elena. Her voice was tight, barely holding back tears. "Minjun, I'm at the hospital. It's Zoe. She fell from the jungle gym. Broken arm. I forgot my wallet in the rush and they need insurance info, and she was hyperventilating." "Breathe," Minjun commanded, his voice dropping into the register he used to calm panicked investors. "Which hospital?" She told him. "I am on my way. Do not speak to anyone until I arrive." He hung up. He looked at the lawyers, who were waiting for his decision on a $50 million deal. "We are finished for the day," Minjun said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "But sir," the lead counsel protested, "the deadline is at 5. Minjun paused at the door. He looked at the man with eyes that were cold and flat. "My daughter has broken her arm," he lied, the words slipping out with a shocking ease, tasting like iron and honey. "Reschedule." He left the room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. When he arrived at the ER, he didn't just bring his wallet. He brought the full force of his presence. He navigated the bureaucracy like a battering ram, ensuring Zoe was moved to a private room, that the best orthopedist was called in, and that Elena had a cup of decent tea in her hands within 20 minutes. Later, as Zoe slept with her cast propped up on a pillow, Elena sat in the plastic chair, staring at him. He was standing by the window, watching the rain, his tie undone, looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. "You called her your daughter," Elena said softly. It wasn't a question. Min-jun didn't turn around immediately. He watched his reflection in the dark glass, a man who had been a ghost, now haunted by the living. It was a tactical shorthand. To expedite the process, he said, his defense weak even to his own ears. Elena stood up and walked to him. She placed her hands on his back, resting her forehead against his shoulder. "You're a terrible liar, Min-jun," she murmured. He turned, wrapping his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. "I know," he breathed. "I am finding that the truth is becoming unavoidable." The timeline of their lives began to blur, measured not in business quarters, but in milestones of integration. 1 year later, the scene was the school auditorium. Min-jun sat in the front row, his legs cramped against the seat in front of him. On stage, Chloe was playing a tree in the school play. It was a non-speaking role. She merely had to hold branches. Min-jun watched her with the intensity of a man watching an opera at La Scala. When she successfully didn't drop the branches, he led a standing ovation that was slightly too aggressive for a third-grade production, forcing the other parents to awkwardly join in. Elena, sitting beside him, laughed until she cried, squeezing his hand. 18 months later, a Sunday morning in Min-jun's penthouse. The pristine, museum-like quality of the space had been compromised. There were pink sneakers by the door. A half-finished puzzle occupied the coffee table. Min-jun was in the kitchen, wearing a world's okayest dad apron, a gag gift from Zoe that he wore with confusing pride, attempting to make pancakes. The batter was lumpy. The girls were sitting at the island, swinging their legs. "You have to flip it now," Zoe critiqued. "It's burning. I am letting it caramelize," Min-jun argued, panic rising in his voice. "Mom," Chloe yelled. "He's killing the pancakes again." Elena walked in, kissed Min-jun on the cheek, and deftly took the spatula from his hand. "You manage the empire, Min-jun. I'll manage the breakfast." He stepped back, watching the three of them in the morning light, and realized that the silence he had once cherished was now his greatest fear. He didn't want the quiet. He wanted the burnt pancakes and the critiques. He wanted the noise. 5 years later, the tea room at the Grand Obsidian Hotel had not changed. The marble was still polished to a mirror shine, the velvet drapes still held the scent of dust and history, and the piano player was still bored. But the table for 4 in the center of the room was different. It was occupied. Min-jun sat in the same chair, his temples now dusted with a distinguished gray, his suit just as sharp. Opposite him, Chloe and Zoe were 15, distracted by their phones, wearing teenage versions of high fashion that Min-jun had undoubtedly paid for. Elena sat beside him, her hand resting comfortably on his knee under the table. They were arguing about college applications. "I'm just saying," Chloe said, looking up from her screen, "art school is a viable strategy." "You said strategy is about adapting," Min-jun sighed, lifting his cup. "Strategy is about survival and leverage. Art school is expensive." Finger painting, Zoe snorted. "You bought a painting for $2 million last week, Dad." The word dropped casually, without the weight of roleplay.
"Dad."
It had been years since they stopped saying pretend. Min-jun set his cup down. He looked at the three of them. The grief of the past was still there, a faint scar tissue on his heart, but it no longer hurt to touch. It was simply part of the geography of who he was. He tapped his spoon against the glass, a sharp, clear sound that made the girls look up. Elena looked at him, sensing the shift in his energy. Min-jun reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a business card this time. He pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it on the table in front of Elena. The room seemed to go quiet, the hum of the crowd fading into a dull buzz. "It has been 5 years, Min-jun said, his voice steady but low. "The initial contract was for 20 minutes. I believe we have exceeded the terms." Elena stared at the box. She looked at the girls, who were suddenly grinning, their phones forgotten. She looked back at Minjun. "Is this a renegotiation?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "No," Minjun said, reaching out to cover her hand with his. "It is a permanent acquisition. I am tired of pretending, Elena. I would like to make the title official." He opened the box. The diamond was modest by his standards, but perfect for hers. "Will you marry me?" The silence that followed wasn't the heavy, lonely silence of a man waiting for a ghost. It was the breathless, suspended silence of a wish being granted. Elena didn't answer with words. She simply leaned over and kissed him, while across the table, the twins high-fived, their long con finally complete. "About time," Zoe whispered. "We planned this 5 years ago." Minjun broke the kiss and looked at his daughters. "I know," he said, a real smile breaking across his face. "I just needed to be sure I was worthy of the role."